In this video, I'm going to show you how to generate a triangle, square, and sawtooth waveform using an FM synthesizer. There are only 4 parameters that we need to change. Those are algorithm selection, operator output level, feedback, and coarse frequency. So the first one we'll do is a triangle waveform. So first thing we need to do is select a patch to initialize and initialize it. Then we select our algorithm, and what we need are 2 operators, one above the other. So one will be our carrier and the one above that will be our modulator. For the triangle waveform, the modulator does not need a feedback loop around it, but for the square and sawtooth waveforms it will. So you can choose either one. If you choose a 2 operator stack with carrier and modulator, if the modulator has a feedback loop around it, just make sure that the feedback value is down to 0. Okay, so after we've selected our algorithm, we then adjust our output levels. If you're not familiar with how to interpret algorithms and you're still getting used to adjusting values for multiple operators, one good thing to do is scroll through all of your operators and turn their output levels down to 0, and then using the on-off switches, switch off all of the operators that you're not using. That way when you scroll through using the operator select button, you'll only be scrolling through 1 or 2 operators that you're using, and it's a lot easier to keep track of what values you've entered in. And it's also handy so that you don't change values on operators that you don't intend to use, because if you have them switched off and they've got positive values, when you save the patch and then recall it, they will become active again even though you've switched them off during the editing process. Okay, so we've selected our algorithm, a 2 operator stack, carrier, modulator, and now we are changing the output levels for the carrier and the modulator. So operator 1 for me is my carrier, so I'm going to turn its output level to 99, which is maximum, and there we can hear the sine wave. I select my modulator, which for me is operator 2, and for a triangle waveform its output level will be 50. Next I select coarse frequency, and for triangle waveforms we need a ratio of 1 to 2, so, and that's carrier to modulator. So if my carrier is at 1, then my modulator should be at 2, and that way we'll have the right mix of frequencies to generate a triangle wave like here. So with FM synthesis, a lot of these results from adjusting output levels and modulating sine waves, most of the time, if not all of the time, we will only get approximate results. So these are just emulations of what we would otherwise find on subtractive synthesizers to be perfect waveforms. In some cases, but not always. So this for us is one of the more economical ways of generating these classic waveforms that we would find on subtractive synths. And this here, for me, seems to be one of the better recipes for generating a triangle wave. We've only used 2 operators, and we've only changed 2 parameters, which is our output levels and the coarse frequency. And that's not including the algorithm selection. Okay, so that's our triangle waveform. Going back to the coarse frequency parameter, the ratio is 1 to 2, but 1 to 2 are not the values. So it would work just the same if I were to have a ratio of 1 to 2, and if my modulator was 1, then my carrier would be 0.5. The only thing that would change is the pitch range across the keyboard. So when you're dealing with coarse frequencies and multiple operators with coarse frequency values, so long as you keep them all relative to each other, whether you're increasing them or decreasing them, effectively you should end up with the same result in terms of waveform, but you will have a different pitch range across the keyboard. So it's a really good way of programming pitch ranges across your keyboard. So that's the triangle waveform. If we initialize this patch, we can make a sawtooth. Now sawtooth this time requires a 2-operator stack, carrier, modulator, but this time the modulator needs to have a feedback loop. So when you select your algorithm, make sure you select 2-operator stack with a feedback loop around the modulator. Now when you've got that, again we turn all of our output levels down to 0 if you're not familiar with working with multiple operators, and then we turn off all of the operators we won't be using. Okay, now again our carrier has a full output level, and this time our modulator goes all the way up to 75. If you're using a 4-operator FM synth, you may have a slightly different engine to what's inside here in the DX7, so your parameter values may not match up and have the same results as what I'm getting here. So you may just need to adjust your parameter values just slightly, but you'll be using the same functions, and these parameter values that I'm using will get you close enough that you know whether to increase or decrease just slightly. Okay, so output level 75 for the modulator, 99 for the carrier. For this patch we're not using the coarse frequency, but we are using the feedback. So let's just hear where we are at the moment. So from our sine wave, we've increased the modulator to get this sound. So sine wave, and we're increasing our modulator's output level to 75. Now we increase the feedback all the way to 7. And as you can see here, we again have the FM synthesis version of a sawtooth wave. It's approximate, but it still has a lot of the characteristics that we would associate with a sawtooth wave. And from this point we are able to use it much like how we would using a subtractive synthesizer. In FM synths we still have LFOs, we still have envelopes, and I will show you in another video how to emulate filtering as well. Now, to generate a square wave, we actually repeat the sawtooth waveform process, but instead we add one more parameter, which is the coarse frequency, and we use the same ratio that we used for the triangle waveform. So the ratio is 1:2. So again, if my carrier's coarse frequency is 1, then my operator's coarse frequency needs to be 2. And again, the waveform is approximate, but we get that nice sort of hollow square sound with the sharp peaks, as we can see here. So that's it. Triangle, sawtooth, and square waveforms using an FM synthesizer.